Hello everyone, this is Medical Gateway, and today we're going to start Guyton chapter number 2, which is the cell and its functions. So, cell. As you all know, cell has nucleus in its center, which is surrounded by nuclear membrane, and cell is itself is surrounded by cell membrane, which is also known as plasma membrane. And everything inside the cell is known as protoplasm. In this part, basically, we are going to discuss the basic constituents of the cell, which includes water, protein, carbohydrates, and lipids, and also there are some electrolytes in the cell. So, coming to water, the maximum amount of any substance which is present in cell is water. Water is 70 to 85%. Okay, so 70 to 85% of cell is water, except the fat cells, because in fat cells the quantity of the water is pretty low. Then wherever there is water, there are electrolytes. As we discussed in the previous chapter, some electrolytes are present in the intracellular environment in greater quantity, like potassium, magnesium, phosphate, and sulfate, and the others are more commonly present in the extracellular environment, like sodium chloride, bicarb, and calcium. Now, the relatively lesser quantity of sodium chloride, bicarb, and calcium is present inside the cell, but it is present. So if someone asks which electrolytes are present in the cells, you have to answer potassium, magnesium, phosphate, and sulfate are present in the greater quantity, whereas sodium chloride, bicarb, and calcium are present in the lesser quantity. Okay, so after water, then comes the proteins. Water is 70 to 85%, whereas proteins are 20%. Now, proteins, there are two types of proteins. One is structural proteins, and the other one is the functional proteins. Now, structural proteins make the structure, and functional proteins are basically involved in the functions. Now, how functional proteins are basically involved in the functions of the cell? Functional proteins are basically enzymes. And as you know, the enzymes catalyze different chemical reactions, increasing and decreasing different rates of chemical reactions. Then we have structural proteins. Structural proteins are basically fibrillar proteins. So there are three types of fibrillar proteins. One is microfilament, other one is the microtubules, and the third one is the intermediate filaments. So to have micro in their names, microfilaments, microtubules, and then intermediate filaments. Now, microfilaments. So which proteins are microfilaments? So examples of microfilaments are actin and myosin. Now, as you know, actin and myosin are basically the famous contractile proteins present inside the muscles. Okay, so those actin and myosin are basically microfilaments. Then coming towards the intermediate filaments. Intermediate filaments include keratin, vimentin, and neurofilaments. Keratin protein is present in nails, vimentin is present in some mesenchymal cells, and neurofilaments are present in neurons, providing them structural support. Then we have microtubules. Microtubules include flagella, cilia, and centrioles. As you know, flagella and cilia are involved in the locomotion of cells, whereas centriole is involved in the cell replication. Okay. After proteins, we have lipids. So 70 to 85% is water, 20% is proteins, and lipids are only 2%. Okay. So there are three types of lipids present inside the cell. One is phospholipids, other one is the cholesterol, and the third one is the triglycerides. Okay. So phospholipids, cholesterol, and triglycerides. Now, 95% of the fat cells are basically triglycerides. Where we discussed that most of the cells are 70 to 85% of water. There I told you that except the fat cells, because fat cells are basically 95% triglycerides. Okay, now what is the main function of the lipids? Where are the lipids mostly present inside the cell? Lipids basically make the cell membrane. Now, cell membrane is made by something which acts as barrier, with something which acts as barrier for water and water soluble substances. Now, lipid is basically insoluble in water. Therefore, lipids are used in making the cell membrane barrier. After lipids, we have carbohydrates. So carbohydrates are only present in a very low quantity, that is 1%. Okay. So carbohydrates, the main function of the carbohydrates in the cell is to provide nutrition. Cells have glycogen stores. Where this glycogen is coming from? This glycogen is coming from the glucose. In the extracellular environment, we have glucose, and the glucose enters the cell and is converted into glycogen stores. Different cells have different quantities of carbohydrates. As I told you, most of the cells have 1% carbohydrates, but carbohydrates are present in 3% in muscles and 6% in liver. Why muscles have more carbohydrates as compared to the other cells? Because muscles need rapid energy from the breakdown of carbs. Okay, so in muscles there are 3% carbohydrates, and liver has to metabolize and involve carbohydrates in different chemical reactions. Therefore, liver has 6% of the carbohydrates. Other than the nutrition, carbohydrates are also involved in making some structures like glycoprotein. Now, glycoprotein is also involved in making cell membrane. So this is it. These were the basic components of cell. In the next lecture, we will discuss regarding cell membrane. See you in next part.